Hi, I'm Lindsay McAfee with KPMG's Washington National Tax Group. I'm here with Bob Rothery, who will give us the latest on tax return filing status for same-sex married couples. So, Bob, why is this such a big issue this year?
Well, Lindsay, as you know, the Supreme Court this year issued a landmark decision last summer in the U.S. v. Windsor case, which struck down part of a law called the Defense of Marriage Act. That law had prevented the U.S. from recognizing same-sex marriage, and the Supreme Court's Windsor decision created a lot of uncertainty about how broadly the government was going to interpret the decision.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, for example, before the court decision, if a same-sex couple was legally married, say in Massachusetts, they would file as married for state tax purposes, but single for federal tax purposes. Now, obviously, they'll file as married at both levels, state and federal. But it wasn't clear what would happen if that couple were to move to a state where same-sex marriage wasn't legal, or what would happen to a couple who live in a state where it wasn't legal but traveled somewhere else to get married and then returned to their home that didn't recognize the union.
So, do we have answers to those questions now?
Well, actually, now we do. Many government agencies, including the IRS, the Customs and Immigration Service, and the Justice Department, have announced that they'll treat a couple as married if their union was legal in the jurisdiction where it was performed. And that includes foreign countries, and also regardless of where they currently reside. And that means, for example, that if a same-sex couple that is married lives in Pennsylvania, which doesn't recognize their marriage, they'll still file their federal returns as married, but they will file their state returns as single.
Wow, so it's really important to know which states recognize same-sex marriage then. Well,
that's absolutely true, but it's even more complicated because there are a number of states that have announced that even though they don't permit same-sex marriage, the couples should use their federal filing status on their income tax returns. So couples that are married and who live in Colorado, Illinois, Missouri, Oregon, and Utah should file as married even though the state doesn't recognize their marriage. Illinois has legalized same-sex marriage, but the law isn't effective until July 2014. And Utah's ban was struck down by a court, so while going through the appeals process, Utah is recognizing same-sex marriage for tax purposes for tax year 2013 only.
I see. State tax is often very complicated, and this is no exception, it seems. Does the federal government recognize registered domestic partners?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked, and the answer is no. So as you know, several states have created a special status that grants marital rights to certain unmarried couples, and depending on the state, that's either called civil union or registered domestic partnership, or RDP. These couples will generally file their state taxes as if they're married, but they'll use single status on their federal returns. And of course, then there's the issue of community property.
Tell me more about that.
Well, and as you know, the ownership of property and income is a matter of state law. And several states have a concept of community property that says if one spouse earns some income, the income belongs equally to both of them. And so there's 3 states, California, Nevada, and Washington, that extend that community property principle to registered domestic partners. And that has a big impact on the way the income is split and reflected on their 2 single status federal tax returns.
So is there anything more we should be watching for in the upcoming months?
Well, at this point, the courts have struck down the prohibitions on same-sex marriage in several more states, including Kentucky, Oklahoma, Utah, and Virginia, and appeals of those court decisions are underway. Then there's some states like Nevada and Virginia that have chosen to stop defending the bans on same-sex marriage in those states. And then there's yet other states like Oregon that are in the process of repealing their prohibitions either through referenda or by legislation. So many commentators expect that some of these lawsuits will reach the Supreme Court relatively soon. In the cases that they decided in 2013, the court had sidestepped making a decision on whether same-sex marriage bans were valid in any case. So the suits that are being appealed now will probably force the court to make a decision on that topic.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Bob, for summing that up for us. If you have questions on same-sex couple tax issues, please feel free to reach out to Bob or anyone from the Washington National Tax IES or SALT groups. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.